just finished Barry. Pretty good.
We need to talk about Barry.
Barry! Oh, hurrah! I'm a little lad who loves Barry.
I have no idea what I'm doing for this video. I guess I'm just going to do dishes while I talk about this. I decided to give Barry a shot just because I heard good things about it, and I also like Bill Hader. And I gotta be honest with you, with that first season, I wasn't really that into it. So the story is basically Barry is an assassin. He's a killer for hire, if you will, who wanders into a acting class because one of his marks is in that acting class, and he kind of falls in love with acting in the stage and Gene Cousineau, played by none other than Henry Winkler. After seeing that stage, he finally finds a purpose in life and wants to give up the whole murder game, but the murder game isn't ready to give him up. Along with the Chechen, however you say that, the Chechen mob, or No Hank and Fuchs, played by Stephen Root, or
William Fontaine de la Tour d'Autrive.
And like I said, honestly, the first season I wasn't that into it. A lot of the comedy in this series really didn't land for me for the most part, and that continues throughout the rest of the series, where it's just not my, I guess, kind of humor. It's dry, sure, but it can be dark. But I don't know, just a lot of the humor aspects just wasn't landing for me that much. And with season 1, I was like, all right, you're kind of getting bored, like a little drawn out with how Barry's like, you know, into this thing and his killer life. It reminded me a lot of season 1 and reminded me a lot of Dexter, just not as interesting. But then like the last couple episodes of season 1 kind of just ramped up, and I was like, okay, I'm kind of curious to where this goes with season 2. And then I think the show just progressively gets better as it goes on with season 2, 3, and 4. Personally, my personal favorite is probably season 3. I do think the show gets better as it goes on. I do think season 4 is pretty solid. We'll talk about spoilers here in a little bit. Bill Hader is just so good. Like, I just really enjoyed everything he was doing here. He kind of plays like, I don't know, like Barry is a pretty like mentally intricate character, and over this series you see that personality shift and change and chameleon and everything like that, and Bill Hader just carries that so well. Like, I understand Bill Hader is like one of the pins for this show, but like if Bill Hader wasn't the lead as Barry, like I don't know if it would have worked, because Bill's like whole like personality as a lead just fits this show perfectly. It fits everything about Barry as a character perfectly, and it sells it and makes it really believable. However, I think Henry Winkler as Gene Cousineau was absolutely one of the best performances of the entire series. I think Henry just, how am I going to keep messing up his name? I think Henry just knocked this one out of the park, and he's this really narcissistic and kind of awful character, but there's a level of humanity and sympathy with his character that I just found to be really intriguing. Like, yeah, he's narcissistic, he's full of himself, you don't really trust him in a way, but at the same time, like, I want to see him more. I kind of want to root for him. You know what I mean? It's weird. No Hank, played by Anthony Carrigan, is probably the lead comedy role, I would say. They really lean into him to be like a huge comedy relief character. And I think his character gets more interesting as the series goes on. But I still didn't find most of his character to be that interesting. Out of like the lead characters, it was to me probably one of the least impactful. And he becomes more of a role as the series goes on. And I just like, I don't know, it was okay. Like, yeah, his character got better as it went on, but at the same time, like, I wasn't that interested in it. Monroe Fuchs, played by Stephen Root, or Stephen Root, I don't know. I never can understand if it's Stephen or Stephen when it's like that. I'm just going to say Stephen Root. Was one of my favorite characters. He was constantly interesting. He was also constantly funny. Stephen Root just knocks it out of the park with the performance here. I thought his performance was just great. There's a lot of intricate characters in this one. And I think Fuchs as a character is kind of like the overarching villain of the series, is super fun. He's a very, very fun villain. He has personal ties with Barry that makes him interesting in that aspect, but at the same time, like, he's kind of like, I wouldn't say incompetent, but he's like competently incompetent, if that makes any sense. Watching his character evolve into the Raven as the story goes on was hilarious, but also really good as like an actual threatening villain that I found to be really, really solid. Sarah Goldberg, who plays Sally Reed, was also an amazing performance. I think Sally Reed is the worst character of the entire show, but in a good way. She is awful constantly. She is an awful person to be around. Sally playing the kind of love interest of Barry throughout the show. Mild spoiler, but not very much. She is just horrendous the entire time. Incredibly narcissistic, manipulative, kind of awful just constantly, and she has this whole pity me, pity party kind of thing aspect to her character that I just think as the series goes on just develops into something very, very interesting. I think she's an awful character. I would never want to meet her in real life, if you know what I mean, but as a character to watch, she adds a really interesting dynamic to the entire show that has a really, really good character arc toward the end of the show. I don't like the character ending for her, if that makes sense, if you've seen the show, but there's a really solid arc to the back end of this show that I really, really liked with her character as it affects both Barry and I guess Jean at the same time. I think the show is really well put together. I think there's other than the first season where I feel like it's trying to get its footing, I don't feel like there's very much fat, especially for season 2, 3, and 4. Everything works seamlessly and blends so well together as just perfect pacing. The cinematography is pretty good. I've seen some pictures where people were talking about how great the cinematography is. I don't think it's amazing. It's not like the most filmic or the most like well shot, but there are some really good choices in presentation in terms of directing and blocking. Like so there's like different ways you can look at cinematography. You can look at it either like a straight on, like how cinematic does this look? How picturesque does this look? Do I want to take every frame out of this movie and put it on a poster? That's not the case here, but there are some really good choices of holding the camera still, good choices on blocking or how they present certain character moments that I think work incredibly well. It's one of them that I think it could go a little deeper on multiple viewings for sure. That's definitely a possibility. I kind of wish the coloring though was just a little bit more interesting. The coloring's pretty flat, it's pretty neutral, which could work with the overall themes of what Barry is presenting, but I do kind of, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I kind of wish for that a little bit more cinematic-ish look. But the way the story is paced, and especially with season 3, the way certain things are presented, I think is just great. And I think this is where we can go into spoiler talks. So if you're not interested in spoilers, then skip ahead. There will be a marker on the screen or a section in the timeline to jump to. So jump to that now, please. Okay, so season 1, the arc is they kill Gene Cousineau's girlfriend, who was the detective who found Barry Berkman was the serial killer. So Barry kills her, and then that kind of makes the entire rest of the series work so incredibly well. Because the rest of the series is basically Barry trying to bury that murder, try to get away with it, Gene trying to figure out what happened to her, and then that whole dynamic of Gene suspecting Barry, Barry trying to save face with Gene, and everything just falls back on this one decision, and it ties together so incredibly well, especially in the end of season 4 when Gene kills Barry. Was such an amazing decision, but it's also kind of funny that the series leans into blaming Gene for everything, because Gene's character is kind of to blame for everything, unintentionally to blame. It's like his own, I guess, ego and narcissism kind of wrapped up here, and everything he wanted was to be a star, and that fame and desire led to him being the villain of the show, the villain of the story that people remember. So Bill Hader, Barry Berkman, is a massive serial killer, a massive killer for hire who murders countless amount of people throughout the show, including the detective, Janice Moss. Yeah, Detective Janice Moss. So everything kind of leans on this one murder, which is kind of set up in cause because Henry Winkler's character is so pursuant on what he wants that he disregards everybody. So at the end of the series where Gene kills Barry, then everybody remembers the story of Gene being the murderer. He's the one who sets up the ending to where Sally Reed and Barry Berkman's kid John is watching the film they made on Barry Berkman and Gene Cousineau's life, where Gene Cousineau is set up to be the evil mastermind and Barry Berkman's the innocent Marine who got wrapped up into this whole thing, is really interesting, because as you watch the show, that is not what happened at all. That's what John is going to remember of his father, and that's what the world is going to remember this story, because that's what ended up being like presented out. Barry's descent in season 2 and 3 of his mentality of how he just kind of goes down the psychopath rabbit hole is so well done and so interesting. I loved when he's like in prison, the presentation of like just this desolate dead human that has nothing to live for, and so he's just filled with contempt and kind of rage, but also kind of has just lows of nothing, was so well done. And the acting and the performances by Bill Hader was just phenomenal, just absolutely phenomenal. I also really loved with season 4 of him and Sally running off and having a kid together. We have a time jump between season 3, like season 1 through 3 is pretty much in order, and then season 4 is a time jump, and I thought that worked really well because we jump into a perspective that time has passed, things have settled, but because of these people being who they are, things are never really settled. They can't just let things go. And so you lead into the climax, which is where, you know, Gene kills Barry, and it's just such a good roundabout way to end the series. And then it's even better considering that John is going to have the movie where Gene was the bad guy the entire time. And it's also kind of like a say of the bastardization of true stories, I guess you could say, of Hollywood, but it's just a great way to end out this series for sure. Because it's like, also, you know, Barry always wanted to be the good guy too, you know what I mean? He always thought of himself as a good guy doing horrible things to horrible people, but in reality he was a horrible person. Gene was kind of just narcissistic, but he always clamored for that spotlight. And so you have, you know, Gene's the bad guy, Barry's the good guy, which is just super fun. And then, you know, you have also the self-implosion of the bad guys toward the end of the series too, which is just a way to clean everything up. But yeah, I thought this show was great. As the show just went on, I just found it to be a lot more interesting. I thought season 2, 3, and 4 were excellent. I'm giving the show overall an 8 out of 10. I think season 1 is closer to like a 5.5 or a 6, leaning closer to a 6 because I think the ending of the season's a lot better. But season 2, 3, and 4 are all like 8 out of 10. Season 3 and 2 and 3 probably being like 8.5 out of 10s, and then season 4 being like an 8 out of 10. I just thought this show was, I just thought this show was super enjoyable and super interesting, and I thought a lot of it was really well done. It's nice, short, sweet, and to the point, which I also like. It's like 32 episodes that are all like a half an hour a piece, and it does just burn by really quickly. Yeah, I would definitely recommend Barry if you haven't seen it. It's on HBO Max if you want to binge the show like I did. Definitely recommend it. Check it out. I'm like, how low can I get? Is it going to just focus on the plate? All right. Anyway, that's been this video on Barry. Probably the audio is pretty bad right now, but what does it matter? If you want to support the channel, consider subscribing. If you're not already subscribed, liking the video, commenting, and sharing the video goes a long way in helping the channel out. You could also become a member if you're interested in that kind of thing. Links down in the description below. My TikTok got banned, and I'm still waiting to see if that comes back. We'll see. But my gaming channel's down below, Twitch, whatnot. So, deuces, Bigelow.